You see me going back and forth here. And is there any wonder why vendors get frustrated with our RFPs? If you post RFPs publicly, do you think you could withstand my critique of your RFP? Hello and welcome. I'm Catherine Corin, your procurement guide. I have over 30 years in procurement in Canada, both in the private and mostly in the public sector. I have a lot of stories and tips and tricks to share with the next generation of procurement staff. This week, I thought I would go to BC Bid, where RFPs are publicly posted, and randomly pick one and walk you through my critique of it, just as a way to show how I review and edit RFPs. After I started editing, I thought this might be a little too harsh. I didn't want the person who posted it to feel badly and feel blindsided. So I thought instead, I will give an overview of some of the things I found without saying who posted it, the company, etc. I'll give you some of the clips as I was scrolling through and some of the facial expressions of some of the things I found as I went along. But really, this week, I think I'm going to give a summary of what I found rather than walk you through a critique in real time. Although, as a tip, a critique in real time of a draft RFP is a great way to teach and educate people so they can see how someone reads their RFP and have to flip pages to find information, or how it reads and they don't understand a full concept. One thing you can do when you do your RFPs, have a fresh set of eyes look at it before you post it, and even have them critique it in front of you so that you can catch things that you may know inside your head but hadn't thought of it from an external point of view. So let's get into some of the things I found. So, first of all, the RFP was issued in September of 2024, September the 16th, which was a Monday, and it closed on October the 8th. Really, they gave people 3 weeks. And there is some nuance to, you never close on a Monday, you never close on the Tuesday of a long weekend. And that's something that carried over from days when we used to get courier or mail in proposals, because if it was going to arrive by the Monday, it had to be in the courier's hands on Friday. And a lot of vendors would ask, like, I could have used that extra time. I can't trust it sitting with the courier over the weekend. So that's that kind of background as to why people don't close on a Monday or the Tuesday after a long weekend. It's a holdover from when we used to do it all manually. Anyways, so moving on with the RFP, the cover page. Right off the bat, we have a cover page with a cross reference for inquiries to go to section 29 of the RFP. Section 29, when you flip pages to get to it, was about legal entities. But if you flip the page and looked at term number 30, that was about inquiries. So that's the first tip. Always double check your cross references in your RFP at the end, because if you are manipulating terms and section numbers and appendice lettering, you have to make sure you've got all those cross references correct. Otherwise, you have people flipping around and don't know, okay, am I looking at legal entities for my inquiries, or do I look? So that's the first thing right off the bat on the cover page. Then you get into the summary of the requirement. So that section in the RFP is a summary for vendors to read through. What are you looking for? What are the requirements? Just the highlights of the most important information for them to decide, do I want to read further? So the summary of the requirement should be like an executive summary, like the key points they need to understand out of the document later. In this particular case, the summary was about the type of agency they wanted to partner with. So there was further details that you would have to read further in order to understand. But just for awareness, that summary could be helpful for people who may not be in the business but think they are, and they read the summary and go, oh no, this isn't for me, and they don't waste a lot of time reading through the rest of the document. Then we got into definitions. So definitions in the RFP are the capitalized terms, and definitions to make sure there is a common understanding of the use of some terms within the document. This generally is written as boilerplate for a lot of the contractual terms, but it's even the reference to what is a proponent versus a contractor and who a successful proponent is. That's usually in a lot of templates. Understand those definitions so you use them properly and don't mix them up throughout your document. I say this now, I was going through the document. Later, I will tell you that it was mixed up all over the place. Also, if you do definitions, like if you create your own capitalized term or you're trying to identify a definition for your understanding of a term versus what the marketplace might think, like for instance, what an intermediate level specialist means to you, you would define it. In this RFP, it then went into the template terms, which usually is boilerplate from the legal team on the rules of conduct of the process, some of the laws, compliance, etc. In this particular case, two of the terms, they cut out what was there and referred vendors to a later section in the document where they spelled out the terms. So now they've created, okay, you have terms and conditions in this section, but you've also referred them to another section later in the document. You're now creating a flip back and forth of the process. Certain sections should be left intact for ease of reference, because generally you would take those terms and conditions, give it to your legal team to review. Let the salespeople work on the requirements of the RFP. But now you've got two separate sections. Background, usually there is a flow to lead the vendors into a context and understanding of your requirements. You start with some background of your organization, your mandate, what led you to this place of needing this service. You would expect to say what the problem is you're trying to solve, if what you may have done in past that no longer works, or that you've been buying this service on an ongoing basis, it's time to refresh things. All that is background, like who you are, why you need to buy this, what led you to where we are now. In this particular case, we had some background in that section, but as we started reading further, there was further background later that needed to come back. So again, you're flipping pages back and forth. Some questions came up reading the background, but then you found it later. And for instance, it was what their media strategy was in a later requirement as opposed to in the background about the organization. Then they got into the project scope and budget, which is the normal flow of leading us into what we require. And then you get into the requirements. In the requirements, they have some really nice words. Not sure how it is factual and contextual for a contract. For instance, they talk of, we want an agile, collaborative, innovative agency with a proven track record. Okay, what does that mean? What they expect of a contractor to be agile, what they expect of a contract to be collaborative. It's very high level. Then they got into the successful proponent must be willing to work within an ecosystem of collaboration. We're mixing up our defined terms. The proponent is responding to your proposal. The successful proponent is the highest scoring lead proponent who is finalizing a contract with you. And then the contractor, after the contract is signed, is the one that will be providing the services. So, as written, successful proponent must be willing to work within an equal system of collaboration. So, does that mean when they are the highest scoring proponent, about to enter into contract finalization, you're going to assess them before you sign the contract to make sure? Then later in those requirements, they also say the proponents are required to work collaboratively. If it's a requirement of the services require a contractor to work collaboratively with XYZ, like give it some definition to it. Then the proponents are going to give you a response to demonstrate that they can work collaboratively, not put it in the requirements that proponents are required to work collaboratively. They are not required to work collaboratively with you. They're only responding to your RFP. Evaluations had stages, and the title was Evaluation Stages, stage 1, 2, 3. And then within the stages, they talked about phases. So there was a mix up in terminology right there. It was like, okay, is phase 2 different from stage 2? So things to double check, do some word searches, make sure you're consistent in terminology. The mandatories. So mandatory criteria in an RFP are what the proposal must provide in order to move to the evaluation stage. It's not the mandatory for the contract. It's the mandatory for the proposal. First one, proposal must be received in accordance with the instructions on the front over of this RFP. So we have a spelling error, but it's a standard one. Somebody accidentally took the C out. The proposal must be in English. Yeah. And English must be the primary language spoken and communicated in. How do I do a yes, no for that second part? Yes, if you can see easily if the proposal's in English, but primary language spoken and communicated in? What are they supposed to do to prove that? Yes, we can. Dollar amounts expressed in the proposal must be in Canadian dollars. Okay, fine. We already have them accepting that earlier in the boilerplate terms and conditions, but that's fine. This last one, proponents must be available to attend in-person meetings at blank office with short notice during blank's standard business hours. So the mandatory criteria is for the proposal to come in, yes, no, on each of the mandatory criteria before going to evaluation. This must be available to attend in-person meetings is for a shortlist presentation later, not for getting evaluated. As well, how are they supposed to approve this mandatory? And what is short notice? So are you going to disqualify somebody if you call them up and want them to come and meet in person the next day? I think that one could cause a lot of legal issues, a lot of risk, the way it is in here. I can see that they don't want to have, we're going to book a shortlist presentation. We don't know when we're finished our evaluations and when we have our shortlist, but I don't want to have somebody say, no, I'm not available for a month. That I would have put into the shortlist stage, what the requirement at the shortlist stage. Once notified, proponents must provide blah, blah, blah. This mandatory I see is very problematic. And if I was editing it and providing feedback, I would have eliminated this mandatory completely. Then we got into the evaluation criteria. There were 7 questions for the response, and the response section is how proponents are supposed to provide information and prove to you that they can meet your requirements. You want a mapping. I've mentioned that before in previous videos. You want to take your requirements, your evaluation criteria, and your response questions and have them all in the same sequence, have them all mapped to one another So it's very clear to the proponents, I'm providing you an overview of my experience. It's going to be worth 30 points, and it maps to the experience you said you want the contractor to have. Like you want that all to map. In this particular RFP, they were out of sequence. So they started the questions with the type of buying experience and followed by account management, et cetera, whereas the requirements had the account and agency requirements first and then the types of buying. So, I mean, it's just flipping things around a little bit. The other problematic item was response not to exceed 2 pages, response not to exceed 4 pages. If you limit a response, you're also constraining the ability to demonstrate your requirements. Yes, we want to eliminate 30-page answers to a question. We don't want all the marketing fluff. I've seen 300-page proposals. It's just too much for an evaluation team to get through. But if your requirements are lengthy, you need to give adequate space for them to respond factually. So there's a happy medium. There needs to be a way to identify you want them to answer the questions directly and factually, concisely, in plain language. Additional marketing materials may be submitted as appendices, but will not be scored for evaluation. That's one way to help minimize the very lengthy sales pitches instead of direct response to your questions. Other problematic issue with this one was they were allowing a half page per team member on their experience. Whereas an agency team was worth 15 points. So they wanted an overview of the team with the following for each one: their title, their role, their relevant experience and core skills in the services, their experience with this industry, their location and rate, not to exceed a half page per team member. I don't know how someone's going to demonstrate experience and core skills for not only the services, but the industry in a half page. Some of the issues with this, like most of them are, like I said, beginner type issues. The definitions, misusing proponent versus contractor versus successful proponent, and the timing that each of those take place. The requirements of the contractor versus the successful proponent. And there is a mix up of things that the proponents are going to have to include in their proposal in the requirements for the contractor. And ultimately, we have 7 questions for the evaluation. And so all those questions are kind of all or nothing type questions that I wonder if they really got what they were after. Mandatory, like the mandatory of being able to come for a shortlist presentation, I wouldn't have put that in the mandatories. I would have put it in the phase 2 or stage 2 requirements that, you know, you can add a term that we need you to be available to come on site for a presentation with short notice. We will accommodate as best we can, but if we cannot reach a mutually agreeable time, we will move on. That is something much easier than plugging it into the mandatories. I didn't deep dive into the requirements because it was a lot of information and really I didn't want to go technical in this video. I just wanted to show how, there's a lot of jumping around for vendors to take a look at what you say you need versus what you're asking in the RFP. And there's some things lost in the requirements. Those requirements were a blend of background, what a contractor will do, what a proponent will provide. So you have to split out those requirements and make sure you've got that whole process. So the flow of information should be easy to follow. Who we are and why we have the mandate to do this procurement, background of the requirement leading up to this, where we are now and why we're buying it, the scope of work and what's out of scope for that work, requirements of the contractor that will ultimately be put into the contract with the successful proponent, then the evaluation criteria that should map to our requirements, and then what I want to see in a proposal for you to prove to me you can do this and score the points. So they should all flow nicely so that at the end, okay, they know exactly what they need to put in their proposal because it'll all flow from all the information above. Hope this helps. And like I said, I've mentioned it before, don't copy other people's RFPs.